Hello and welcome back to Chequered Flag. Make sure you're subscribed to BBC Sounds and have push notifications turned on in your phone settings so you never miss a new episode. Now, last week we were planning to bring you a Chequered Flag extra episode, and then the Christian Horner news broke, so that episode went in the bin, but we brought you an emergency podcast instead. So this week we are back, but we're going to delve deeper into the goings-on at Red Bull currently a week later. I'm Harry Benjamin, and I'm joined by the BBC's F1 correspondent Andrew Benson, and special guest this week, former Formula One driver Jaime Alguersuari, who was part of the Red Bull family, driving for the Toro Rosso team, now known as Racing Bulls. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. I mean, Jaime, let's come to you first, and your initial thoughts and reaction a week on from the sacking of Christian Horner as team principal and relieving him of his operational duties.
Hello, Harry, and thank you for inviting me to your program. There's not much to say, really. I think it's the end of an era, to be honest. It's been a long journey for Christian at this team. Obviously, I wasn't related directly with him because I was racing for the B team, let's say. But I was doing a lot of services for Red Bull Technology. That includes simulator work, and obviously I was a reserve driver for Red Bull Racing at first, also before my official drive in Toro Rosso, and yeah, I mean, it's the end of an era. Nothing lasts forever, right? You can't win forever. You don't lose forever. I think the Red Bull days have been amazing. Honestly, they have done great in Formula One. Better than expected. I think, they've won a lot considering their time in the sport. If you compare, it's an energy drink, and considering their time in the sport, and if you compare them to other teams like Ferrari or McLaren, it's insane what they've won in that short period of time. And of course, part of that is Christian's work. We have to be clear, and we have to be honest. Having said that, it's a change of an era now. Who knows what's going to come for Red Bull? I'm not sure. What I can say is that there was a lot going on inside in the last few years, with so many different decisions from Dr. Helmut Marko, Christian, different Red Bull drivers going back and forth. Some strange decisions as well from them, even thinking that maybe they are confused on their decisions and they don't know what's going on, with the driver selection and so on. And now, Adrian Newey left for a reason. There must be a reason for his exit. And now it looks like the whole team is falling apart. That's how I see it from the outside, really. And I'm completely sure Max will leave as well.
Well, that's a strong opening gambit from Jaime Alguersuari.
Yeah, you can call that an interview, right?
Yeah. I mean, look, Andrew, we spoke a lot, our immediate reaction last week. There's only so much more we've learned over the course of the last few days. But as Jaime says, the wider implications of this are still being debated. There's a big brain drain at Red Bull currently, and obviously the driver news around Max Verstappen is still rife in the rumour mill. But what more have you been able to garner since we spoke last?
Well, Harry, I think if we take a step back for a minute and look at the sort of last 2 years or so as a whole, I think we can effectively say, and this sort of touches on something that Jaime just said, there's effectively been a power struggle at Red Bull since before Dietrich Mateschitz died in October 2022, and it's carried on since then. And ultimately, Christian Horner has lost. It looked for a while like he was going to win it. There were periods, people may remember about 15, 16 months ago, Helmut Marko was on the verge of being kicked out. Looked like Horner was working that one, and then Max Verstappen stepped in and kept Helmut Marko in the team. There, of course, have been the accusations of sexual harassment made against Horner by a female employee, which Red Bull rejected twice after internal investigations. We don't know how those are going to resolve themselves outside of Red Bull, of course. And then, as Jaime said, there's been this sort of big turnover of staff, starting with Rob Marshall, who was very influential for a long time as Adrian Newey's kind of number two. He left for McLaren. joined them at the beginning of 24. Then Adrian Newey left. The reason Adrian Newey left was because he was not happy about the way what he knew about Horner and those allegations that I mentioned. And of course, there was a bit of a power struggle in the design department. Since then, we've seen Jonathan Wheatley leave. And let's not forget that when Wheatley signed for Audi, although it's called Sauber at the moment, Horner was the guy who announced that for them, which Audi and Wheatley were both very upset about. Then Will Courtney, the head of strategy, he's signed to join McLaren, but at the moment he's being held to his Red Bull contract. That's a lot of very senior people leaving in this period of time. And ultimately, what's happened is that Horner has lost the support of Shalom Uvidia, the Thai main shareholder. He was the guy who was keeping Horner in a job. He was the guy who was backing Horner through all the ups and downs of the past year. And that support has fallen away, and the consequence is that Horner has lost his job.
So the facts then are pretty clear as to how we've ended up in this situation. Jaime, I want to go back to how you ended your opening statement. You seem convinced Max Verstappen will most likely leave the team then at Red Bull. Why and where do you think he will go?
Well, Andrew actually did a very nice clarification of the whole situation right now at Red Bull. And the thing is that it's very simple to understand why Max would think of leaving right now, because Formula One is a team sport, and you wanna make sure you're in the winning car. At the moment, 2026 regulation, it's obviously a question mark for everyone. Nobody really knows what's gonna happen, but you kind of get an idea. You want to make sure you're in a very competitive car. Besides the money, because one thing I know is that Max is not really definitely looking at the money. He's a hunter, he looks for the win. And probably he's one of those drivers in Formula One, one of those very few drivers in Formula One that only thinks of winning, because that's his natural design since he was a kid, since his dad formed him as a race go-kart driver. And in go-karts, you want to make sure you have the best engine, because the chassis is more or less the same for everyone. But the engine is different. The engine tuner changes. In F1, in the last years, whoever had the best aerodynamics, more or less, the best aero package wins. That would mean the whole Adrian Newey system and team. That's why the whole Red Bull era was in the last 6, 7, 8 years. Now things are changing. Next year we have a new regulation, also with a power unit backing, and I'm sure there is a lot of uncertainties now in Red Bull, because Max feels all this instability, feels the lack of performance of the car, and all of that is due to the fact that the team is just moving down, and people moving away, people going off. Jonathan Wheatley, Adrian Newey, many people of the team left, and that's giving you less trust to yourself. And as a world champion as Max, obviously, it's quite clear that maybe you're thinking of moving somewhere else. I'm 100% sure of that.
So there's a few questions that have come in to us as well from listeners, and if Verstappen then is looking at the current climate of where the team are and planning on leaving, then why is there an almost dialogue that the Verstappen camp have maybe played a part in Christian Horner's demise from the team? This has come in from Neil. There's a lot of talk about the influence that the Verstappen camp have at Red Bull. How has Jos Verstappen, a racing driver's father who isn't on the company payroll, been able to become so influential in its running, Andrew? What would come to you on that one?
Well, I think there's quite an assumption in that question, isn't there? How does he know, Neil, that Jos Verstappen is influential in the running of the team?
Neil knows more than us.
So what I would say, there's a bunch of things to talk about here. I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. The first thing is about Max Verstappen's future. It's clear he's considering it, but I don't know what he's going to do. What we do know is he's under contract till the end of 2028. We know there are performance clauses in that contract because Helmut Marko told the BBC that there were earlier this year, and Horner has since admitted it as well. We don't know what those performance clauses say. Typically, a Red Bull driver performance contract clause revolves around third place in the championship. That's where Verstappen is right now, and he doesn't look like he's under any prospect of losing it. So what sort of influence does that have on his future? I don't know what he's going to do, by the way. What we can say is that in terms of Jos Verstappen, Jos is part of Max's management. There's Max himself, obviously, Jos, his dad, and then a guy called Raymond Vermeulen, who's their manager. And between them, they make decisions about Max's career. And ultimately, of course, Max makes his own call about what he wants to do. Jos Verstappen did not get Christian Horner fired. Let's just be clear about that. That decision was made by the Red Bull hierarchy. What we can say is that Jos Verstappen hated Christian Horner. Everybody in the paddock knows that. Now, so what it does is it takes out a point of tension. Horner's now gone. That point of tension that Max is in the centre of, between his team boss and his father, is not there anymore. And actually, Jos Verstappen worked with Laurent Mekies a long time ago at the very beginning of Laurent Mekies' career. That's the new Red Bull team principal. I'm not saying that's going to make any difference one way or the other. It's just a fact. So at the moment, all we know is lots of questions. But what we can say for sure is Jos Verstappen was not the person who decided on Christian Horner's future.
Well, there you go, Neil. That should answer your question. In terms of the potential options for Verstappen, if he is to go, then Jaime, what would you do? Would you go to Mercedes? That seems where the rumour mill is strongest. I suppose the only person in the field that really could ever consider taking a year off and assessing your options is Max Verstappen. So is that also an option?
No, I don't think so.
No?
I rarely think Max would stay home for a year and not drive.
He'd go to Le Mans, wouldn't he, surely?
Yeah, but I mean, knowing that you're in Formula One and you're recent world champion, you want to keep going, of course. But what I know, I'm 100% sure that probably he won't be long in the sport, because I see this guy like really on very clear ideas. And as soon as he sees he doesn't have a winning car or a winning team, he might call it a day. Why not? I just see this guy really convinced on how he thinks, how he sees his life, his future, his short-term future. And the question is, Harry, what is Red Bull offering to him for the future? What is the package, the technical package that is offering in the next 2-3 years? That's it. That is what must be convincing for him to stay. What are the other teams offering him? That's the whole question here. He's not in a happy position now because he sees how the team is falling off in all ways, emotionally, technically, and everyone is just everyone can see that, and he's just in that position where we are in a year where everything is going to change for a change of regulation. So he has to pick a decision very, very soon.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. And I think what I said earlier about questions, that's what Verstappen has in his head, because nobody knows what the competitive picture is going to look like in 2026. New cars and new engines. And so actually, in many ways, okay, Verstappen's not winning at the moment, or at least not winning as much as he would like to. And as a result of that, he's not that happy. But in some ways, the smart decision is to wait and then move at the end of next year, because you could decide, I'll go to Mercedes on a 3-year contract or whatever, but then what if Mercedes don't get next year's car or engine right? Maybe they get the engine right, like the rumour mill says they have done so far, but maybe their car isn't so good. I mean, at the moment, Mercedes are not exactly making a convincing argument for themselves on a chassis competitive level. They're also lagging behind McLaren, and let's not forget McLaren are a customer of Mercedes engines. So there's lots of unknowns for Verstappen, and it might be simpler just to wait and go, do you know what? I'm going to stick with Red Bull for now. I don't have to do anything. It's still Red Bull. It's still an environment that I'm comfortable in. Let's see how things develop over the next few months. And then I can make a decision when I know what the competitive landscape is in 2026. I don't know what he's going to do, but that could be perceived as a smart decision.
So there's design flaws with the car, clearly. There's the problem over Max Verstappen and its future. There's the power unit development for 2026 and the question marks that brings too. And there's the issue with the second seat. And no matter who is in that car, they seem to underperform. Jaime, it feels like this goes above and beyond just getting rid of Christian Horner. This is a big culture change that almost seems needed at Red Bull. And we spoke about Laurent Mekies briefly earlier. He's going to come in and take the reins. I mean, what kind of task does he have on his hands, and where do you start?
It's a challenge for Laurent. It's a big challenge. But I tell you something. I had the chance to work with Laurent for 3 years, actually, in Toro Rosso, because he was right from the beginning, from the Minardi days. And then when I left, obviously, he stayed for a couple of years, and then he moved to the FIA and then Ferrari. So he has a lot of experience. I think he's done amazingly well. I think he's really up for the challenge. I think he's the man for it. Even though it's going to be tough. I think it's not going to be easy. And probably next year would be the year of the power unit year, the first year that the engines can make a difference.
Jaime, what qualities did you see in Laurent Mekies when you were working with him that make you think he's going to be a good team principal for Red Bull?
He's a chilled man, very easy to work with, very easy to have a conversation, which is so good, unlike Helmut Marko, of course. And that's very important because that gives you that stability emotionally to understand how to improve, how to move ahead, how to organize yourself. He's a very organized man with routines, with very strict, with certain patterns that makes you feel confident and makes you trust in your team, in yourself, and in the people who are around. And that is really, really important. And every time you talk to Laurent, even if you're not working with him, you feel this energy of chill, of trust, of confidence. And he has this just this energy of calmness, and this he helped me a lot. Because I made, when I started in Formula One, it was a very difficult start for me because I had no experience. And he was one of those guys who actually helped me a lot to get the experience, to get me up to the pace, to get me up to the speed. And yeah, I have great memories of me working with him.
So with this appointment then, Jaime, do you think it will really benefit someone like Yuki in that second seat? There's that familiarity there that he had because he was the driver at Racing Bulls before the promotion with Mekies as his team principal. At the start of the year, Mekies was quite supportive publicly about Yuki and his performance and how much he's improved as a driver. So could this help Yuki, A, develop in this second half of the year, but also maybe even try and hold on to that seat?
I think so too. I think Christian probably, I wasn't in the team working with Max, so it's difficult for me to say, but I would say the team was very focused on knowing that there's one car who's doing the job, there's one part of the garage who's actually performing to the very, very high-end standards, and probably, of course, they're trying to maximize the potential of the second driver, but nobody knows better than Laurent to run and help Yuki as himself, So I'm sure the fact that Laurent is in the team, that would benefit Yuki as well, Just especially, Formula One is a game of, it's a very mental game, It's not just putting your helmet, going there and just driving to the best, driving your best. It's about how you emotionally focus before you get the helmet on. Max knows he's the best before he puts his helmet on. And that's 80% of the qualifying lap done. When you have this extra confidence that you know exactly the braking points, you can make mistakes, of course, but it's really a mental game, especially when we talk about thousandths of a second or 1/10, 1/2 Obviously, not when we're talking about half a second or 1 second, but when we're talking about these very margin calls, like very, very small details. That's the mental game when it comes to place.
Well, it certainly will be an intriguing look at how Laurent Mekies brings new life into Red Bull, stepping up halfway through the season and replacing Christian Horner. Andrew, this was a question that's coming from Carol on Horner. There's been some rumours around where his future lies, whether he remains in Formula One. And Carol asked, do you think Christian Horner will join Alpine as team principal? He's apparently a great friend of Flavio Briatore.
Well, I mean, I've seen a lot of articles since Horner was fired by Red Bull as team principal that talking about what an attractive proposition he would be for another team. Of course, he has a great record with Red Bull, with 8 Drivers' Championships and 6 Constructors' Championships. But let's just rewind a bit. He set that team up with one fundamental philosophy, which was get Adrian Newey and make the team work around Adrian Newey. Since Adrian Newey's left, they've not looked the same team. I think Sergio Perez even said, didn't he, that the team started to go downhill the minute Adrian stopped working for them. Of course, that's a very linear argument, and many people would say it can't be as simple as that. But I would say that if you lose someone of Newey's quality, then you're going to certainly lose something from the team. They haven't shown that they can get back to that level of competitiveness that we're used to seeing from them since Newey left, and they've got to prove that, and that's one of the jobs that Laurent Mekies has got on his hands. But I think the other questions about Horner, they kind of wrapped up in the reasons why he's ended up out of Red Bull. He wants total control of a Formula One team. He made that very clear. He was in the Silverstone press conference at the British Grand Prix on the Friday, and he talked about him being at the top of the pyramid and everything cascades down from him. That's how he thinks a team should run. And also, he's got lots of question marks over him. He's presided over Red Bull's decline. He's also got involved in these allegations that we talked about before, which, as I say, are not resolved other than inside Red Bull. So does a team want that sort of person who wants total control as their team principal? There are not many Formula One teams that have a team principal who has total control. Fred Vasseur at Ferrari, he answers to John Elkann, the chairman, and Benedetto Vigna, the CEO. Flavio Briatore might be de facto team principal at Alpine, but he answers to the Renault board. Andrea Stella answers to Zak Brown at McLaren. Zak Brown answers to the McLaren board and the Bahraini main shareholders. And so it goes on. So you could argue that Horner's approach in many ways is out of time, and it's actually what got him into these problems. He wanted total control, but the Austrian side of Red Bull were uncomfortable with the way that he was conducting himself within the team, and eventually that's been his downfall. So I'm not saying that another team won't take him. They may well. I'm just saying that another team, before they take him, is going to have to answer these sorts of questions to their satisfaction, and Horner also would have to answer those sorts of questions to his satisfaction.
Look, there's just two sort of final things I want to see off as a result of this Red Bull change-up, the fallout of it. Andrew, I think we overlooked a little bit, or we mentioned it, of course, but Alan Permane is stepping up as team principal at Racing Bulls, the B team, so to speak. Tell us a bit about Alan and that role there, because he's been around a long time, but I think this is his first time he's going to be front and centre as team principal.
It is, and it's actually a role that he has never pursued. He's never wanted to be team principal. He's done many senior roles. So if we go back to, he was at the Enston team, for want of a better way of describing it, for 36 years through its various guises as Benetton and Renault and Lotus, and back to Renault again, and then to Alpine, until he was fired by Laurent Rossi, the former CEO, which was effectively a decision made by Luca Di Maio, the former Renault CEO. Over some internal politics, which we don't need to get into now. But he's extremely well respected. And actually, if we go back to the Lotus era, and even to the Renault era, if you think back to the Crashgate scandal of 2000, it happened in 2008, but it became public in 2009, he was running the team with Bob Bell in the immediate aftermath of Flavio Briatore and Pat Simmons being fired. So the two of them together. And then when it was Lotus, and Eric Boulier was the sort of team principal, the people running the team on a day-to-day basis were James Allison, the technical director, and Alan Permane. Likewise, at Racing Bulls, when he was at Alpine, he was effectively running the team on a day-to-day basis as sporting director. When he went to Racing Bulls, he was racing director. Laurent Mekies was team principal. Alan Permane was his number 2. So it's a role that he might not have chased. It's a role that he might not have wanted, but I'm sure he'll do it extremely competently. And obviously, Oliver Mintzlaff, the overall boss of Red Bull's external programs, so therefore the overall boss of the F1 program, whose quote, by the way, was on the press release firing Christian Horner as team principal of Red Bull. he has backed Alan Permain with that on that basis that he has full confidence, and obviously Lauren Mekies must have recommended him to Mintzlaff for that decision to have been made. I know Alan Permain quite well. I've got every confidence and belief that he'll do a really good job there.
Yeah, well, it will be, I'm sure the team principal's press conference ahead of Belgium will reveal more on those new in the job for team principal. One final topic I just want to touch on, Jaime, and it goes back to our discussion right at the top of this podcast about Max Verstappen and where his future lies. Of course, George Russell is also being spoken in the same vein, but might well have to make way for a Max Verstappen. That's still very heavily rumoured, nothing confirmed. But if you're George Russell, Jaime, and you're having the best season of your career and you've stepped up in the wake of Lewis Hamilton's departure and you're leading that team, to hear all this discussion, you must be a bit miffed.
Yeah, I agree. So,
I mean, what does George just have to sort of sit there and deal with it? Does he pursue other options? Does he have any other options?
I think so. Yeah, I think nothing is shut down yet. And maybe we're just talking here about the teams that we expect, but maybe there are other teams in the game here for next year. Who knows? It's a new season that nobody really knows who's going to be in the top, and I really believe. That's a personal opinion, of course, that Aston Martin will be a very good team in the future. I'm 100% sure Aston Martin will be one of those teams to watch in the near future. Like, they're building something serious, and I think that's something to look at.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's easy to feel sorry for George Russell. My rule number one as a journalist is never feel sorry for a Formula One driver, okay? They earn too much money and they have too good a job to feel sorry for them. But the reality is that basically, as a Formula One driver, you're always under pressure. You cannot escape it. Whoever you are, even Verstappen is under pressure. And but he's probably under less pressure than anybody else because of his status. Everybody else is taking pressure, and you just have to learn how to cope with that and go about your day-to-day business. Exactly. Jaime obviously knows what I'm talking about because he has been through it. George Russell's going to be fine, and if he isn't at Mercedes, obviously that means Verstappen has gone to Mercedes, which means there's a seat at Red Bull. Who else would Red Bull take in that scenario than George Russell? He's the only one available. Of course, that's where he'll go. So he doesn't have to sweat too much. But he's also, the reason he doesn't have to sweat too much is he's driven an outstanding season this year. He also drove 3 outstanding seasons as teammate to Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes since 2022. So no one's in any doubt in Formula One about George Russell's qualities.
I'll keep my sympathies to a minimum then. All right, look, there is a lot to digest there. Thank you, gents, for joining me for this to discuss all things Red Bull and the fallout of last week's news regarding Christian Horner and his future. No more at the team after 20 years at the helm. We'll, of course, keep you up to date with absolutely everything that continues to fall out. You can keep a track of that on the BBC Sport website. The next race is the Belgian Grand Prix. You can hear our usual race week content for that from Friday the 25th of July, including live coverage of every session, plus the race across the 5 Live network, and it's a sprint weekend as well, so we're well and truly into it from the off. Thank you for your company. This has been an IMG production for BBC Sounds.